Yeah, well,
Yeah, good.
awesome. Thank you so much for everyone who's joined me today. I'm really excited to talk to you about visual communication within science. This is a series called Draw With Me. It's a bunch of basically open access workshops that really introduce non-designers to some of the strategies and tools that can be used in visual science communication. So again, really excited to talk to you about this today. And without further ado, um, I'll just talk just a slightly bit more about myself. I'm a founder of Structuries. That's a consulting and design studio. And in the past 4 years or so, I've worked with a wide range of researchers and scientists like you, with policymakers, educators, on really focusing on that point of transition between going from really complicated data to versions that are more easily digestible for general audiences, right? Like, say, for instance, the public, people from different disciplines, all those sorts of things. Um, I taught previously at Penn State in the classroom as a drawing to learn instructor. So I taught people how to create better diagrams, and I'm currently a registered educator at the American Museum of Natural History, um, graduating in about 20 days here with my undergraduate, and then going on to pursuing my medical doctorate. So, and then, yeah, let's move on to the actual content itself. So when I was reached out to do this workshop, I like to start off these sessions with some kind of an overview objective sort of thing. So overall, right, we're trying to really communicate complex paleoecological data to a wider non-expert public, right? So the start are these, again, the complex data, and the end is how do we connect it to these non-expert public. But before we go anywhere further, I would actually love to hear from you all, which is the question that I think is at the center of any sort of communication is why, right? Why do you want to do this? Why is it important? Why should non-expert public care about the complex data? So if you all could just type that into the chat. It could be, a phrase, a sentence, anything you'd like to share. Why is it that, what is it that brought you here today, and why would you like to become more visually strategic about the way that you communicate?
Kelsey says I have to explain a lot to a non-archaeological audience in my research and my works are inconvenient.
Mhm.
Mike says to engage others outside academia to care for or understand complicated science. And Rahab is pictures, images, speak louder and more broadly. And Laura says the questions that reflect the real impact of our research often come from the general public. I think very important to know how to communicate to them. Yeah, I think those all the answers so far.
Mm. Yeah, these are great answers. Thank you so much for all who participated. And right, like, I'm seeing a mixture of, you know, transdisciplinary communication, right? Explaining it to general public, in a way that is, back and forth, as Laura, you talked about, right? Some of the questions that you all want to answer actually comes from those audiences. So learning how to communicate with them using visuals, and then we'll go into that further on the next slide on why it could be a very strategic way of doing so. Um, so, yeah. Right, so when we think about visual processing and thinking, first and foremost, so our brains process visuals about 60,000 times faster than text. So in terms of, whether that it is you're trying to improve someone's comprehension and retention of the information, you're trying to boost their engagement and connection, visuals are a lot more, for the most part, useful than text or text alone, because you're really able to see the big picture, without, getting lost in a text, which is usually what happens. There's a lot more story elements to visuals. You can customize it in a way that is, more geared towards your audience. You can also, right, you can a lot of times you can use one thing, and then try to tell an entire story. And last but not least, I don't know if you all are familiar with the term systems thinking, but visuals are very useful in terms of showcasing the relationships between concepts. And I find that very important in terms of communication in science, both in, the clients I work with, the organizations I work with, because right within your data, there's a lot of relationships. When you talk to the general public and you need to get them to understand why they should care, there's a lot of, maybe there are incentives at play, maybe there are different concepts that people have to understand. So using visuals to really bridge the gaps between those people will help you get your point across a lot easier. So we'll go back to the objective in terms of, starting out with the complex paleoecological data. And I would say it's actually, in order to move from, right, something as complex as this to general public, we really have to simplify it down. And to me, that usually starts with, again, dissecting the major relationships of what I call within the diagram. So the good thing about, turning from research to a more broad and general communication is that we already have, right? We already have figures. We will like we are going to make figures anyway. So those figures, whatever you already have within a paper or within your poster, those tend to be good places to start thinking about, well, how do I build on top of those things, and then maybe turn it into a different format that is more visually intuitive for a general public. So, say for instance, these two, right? The one on the left is a map. So what it's going to show is spatial relationships, locations of actual right, geographical regions. The figure on the right, I think these are one of your more like classical pollen diagrams. I just took it from one of the papers that you sent me. Right, but it's showing on the left here, those are, let me see. Yeah, so it's showing a mixture of temporal components. It's showing, right, spatial relationships between layers. It's showing density and diversity and maybe some of the components that you're analyzing over time. And as a whole, right, when you only see these diagrams, it's hard for people to understand the big picture, right? Because they see this and it's like, okay, we're analyzing pollen, we're analyzing different maybe geographical um, components, but like why should we care and why do we like why what do these graphics tell us essentially? So really, at the end of the day, you need to show that connection between the pattern that you're noticing within your data, and then how it that can be used to inform kind of the higher level concepts, right? So maybe this is informing changes in climate, changes in cultural activities, changes within human civilization, and really bring it back to something that humans can relate to. And those are usually kind of those higher level themes. And as I'm going through this, I just want to make a note. If you have any questions, want me to elaborate on anything, feel free to type it in the chat. We can answer as we go, or I'm also leaving some Q&A time at the end if you have any questions. So with this being said, I'm going to talk through a figure. I think that was pretty popular and nice in terms of its illustrative and comic-like composition. So you all kind of see, right, like how, like I'll reiterate on some of the relationships that are shown in that figure, and you can really see how they were kind of able to bring it together to that next level, right? So, know why my animations aren't playing. Right, but within this figure, it's showing the temporal relationships. It's pointing out major activities, right? As I said, not just getting lost in some of the like really tiny data, which I'm not saying is not important, right? But when you're talking to general public, um, the figures that you use is ultimately is usually like your main focus of communication. They don't have all the time to read the papers. Sometimes they might not even be that interested, right? So really trying to strategize a figure that can really grab their attention, make it not as daunting is a good step for them to engage in the first place. So again, going back to this figure, it's showing the temporal component, right? It's showing major activities within each of those time periods. It's showing vegetation diversity and density by actually, right, putting on photos of the plants and vegetation. And then last but not least, most importantly, right, it's showing human interactions with these vegetation. So overall, these photos are telling a much more bigger picture story of what this particular research found than, let's say, right, the pollen diagram and the map itself, because it's really bringing together layers of starting from the more basics of the data to eventually, right, what does it mean in the bigger scope? And because it also has it's kind of this comic strip type composition, it allows us to see that shift within these changes over time in a side-by-side way, right? So that's also a really useful way of engaging audiences. And last but not least, right, it's very colorful. So a lot of times, right, that is what grabs people's attention, because anything that looks more fun than a block of text is going to make people intrigued. And again, that's how you kind of get there. That's how you kind of get the step in the door. So we've gone into the slightly more detailed. I've shown some examples, but I kind of just want to back out just slightly bit, right? And then um, talking about the communication process as a whole. And to me, that is something that is usually like you're trying to continuously improve your communication process. And the diagram that I have on here isn't necessarily just visual, but just a framework for you to think about your communication in general. So we've talked about, right, starting from really the foundational parts is what kind of relationships, what kind of stories, what kind of um, concepts are you trying to showcase? I think right, making sure that you're really clear on what you want to communicate is, you know, quite literally one of the most critical steps. And then adding on that, and as we mentioned, adding on that extra layer of really um, trying to like think of it almost as if you're trying to convince someone, right? Why should we care? And remember that, right, for someone who is a general audience, if they're not familiar with this, it takes time to kind of convince them and show them that this is something, right? Like, again, like branching out to the bigger patterns of maybe changes in climate, agriculture activities, how does it impact today, right? All of those things you want to think about when you're deciding on what it is that you want to showcase. Second of all, right, when you're going on higher steps, what kind of format? Right, for us, we're talking about visual communication here specifically, but that could also take multiple formats, right? It could be infographics, could be comics, as we saw, could be illustration, could be a video, right? It could be any of those sorts of things. So, um, making sure that you are, um, right, taking the time to consider what it is that might be helpful. Would be the next step. And third of all, if we just create the visual content and we don't utilize it in a way that is wise, then the word isn't really getting out, right? So third, we want to think about what kind of channels we're putting these materials through, right? We have, let's say you have an infographic, you have comics for illustration, or anything that you're working on. And I know I think someone had already mentioned it. Right, needing visuals to communicate to people at conferences, right? So that would be an example of a channel. Social media is, a huge channel for learning, for gathering information, right? So thinking about how do you repurpose some of the visuals that you create, so you can not only use it at a conference, but you could maybe send it on social media, right? You could send it through a press release, a news story, those sorts of things. So think about different ways that you can actually get your materials in front of your audience. Is that kind of next step within the communication. And last but not least, what can be better, right? This is, as I said, a process for improvement. So as you're going along this journey, making sure that you are taking notes of, doesn't have to be physical notes, but right, like taking note of what is working and what might not be working. You can do that through a lot of different ways, right? You could, um, if you're meeting in person with people, their physical language can probably tell you something about whether or not they understood, right? If you are on social media, doing it through news story, you can think about um, the clicks rate, right? The view rate, like all of those things, you can use it to think about how effective is your communication, right? Because ultimately, we're working to, right, really build on our skills so that we could better connect with people. So with that being said, as I mentioned, social media, I think as it stands currently, it tends to be a very uh, big vehicle for communication. So I just wanted to give a little bit more context and example as to how I have done it in the past. So any type of visuals that you make, right? They can be posted online as like information carousels. So again, doesn't have to be elaborate, but just, and even if you, right, like even at the beginning, even if you have a considerable amount of text, but uh, just organizing them alongside more visually aesthetic graphics, that tends to at least get people interested to look at it, right? So, and then the other way that I usually expand the reach or like repurpose some of the graphics is doing video explainers. So on the right here, I was in my lab talking about one of our virtual reality projects. Um, I do bird evolutionary and genomics research, right? So we were talking about the different tools and the ways that the general public, right, can engage with the lab and can engage with our practice of research, right? So, as you can see, I was talking about a visual. I was showcasing, I wish I can play the video, but it's actually not going to play here. Right. And I was showcasing the different ways that you can actually interact with it in the video. So whatever ways you can, again, and this goes back to whatever ways you can use to really shorten the distance between you and the general public to show them that they can interact with the material in some ways. That is a very useful way of getting them to engage with you, and right, not just throwing information at them and saying you should care, but really visually showing them of you either interacting with the material, some kind of human figure interacting with the material, right? Some kind of story element. That's usually what is helpful in terms of these. So, moving on to more of the tools side of things, um, I understand it can be very overwhelming when you work with a lot of text and you're trying to condense them into visuals. So I tend to use, in terms of creating presentations in a lot of social media graphics, I find Google Slides, Microsoft PowerPoint, and then we'll do a walkthrough after I finish the slide, and as well as templates from Canva. I'm sure you might have seen some of these, but I find these resources, these presets, templates, and assets that are already out there to be great foundations and resources for you to get started, right? Because you can observe the graphics that you really like. You can try to emulate them, right? And then, I mean, a lot of the times you can download the template and try to customize it and play it around with yourself. And then, over time, if you keep doing that, if you keep challenging yourself every single time you have to visually communicate something, right? Eventually, you can start to, right, synthesize. Some of those visual components, so then at the end, maybe you're not starting from a template per se, right? But you are able to kind of put visual components together. So I am going to do, let's see here. Let me do a quick walkthrough of where to find these resources in Google Slides and Canva, and then we might even show how to recreate like the comics that I went through. Let's see here. All right, so let's get started with Google Slides first. Um, so Google Slides, let me see here. The best place, and I think there should be at least counterparts in Microsoft PowerPoint. I don't use it that often. But what I wanted to show is if you go into Google Slides and insert, they have these things called diagrams, right? So like as I said, looking through some of these visual diagrams that have been created inside of these softwares are kind of a great way to think about how you might go about organizing your data in a more um, integrated and succinct way. So we talked about, right, with a lot of pollen analysis and data in just paleoecology in general. There's a lot of timeline, right? So exploring, I don't know if you can see it, exploring some of these options that they already have on here. And it's nice because you can also, you can customize, um, how many elements you want to interact with. You can customize the color. Um, right, so these are great ways and places to start doing some of these things. Similarly, right, like looking at hierarchies, processes, just showing relationships. And you can see, I think you can start to notice as well, some of these diagrams are pretty similar to scientific figures that could be explained that could be included in a publication. But at the end of the day, it's really about, but like I would say the depth of what you're trying to communicate is not right, is not nearly as in depth as what you would in a publication. So really like recognize the fact that you probably have already been doing visual communication in some sort of way, but really cutting it down to some of the most important relationships that you want to showcase is a great way to think about something like this. Yeah, yeah. I just thought I would show this as well. So you can just click on it and then you can customize each of this. Um, right. So I've always thought that this was a useful tool in terms of, then let's go to Canva as well. So, all right, here we go. Canva. Um, right, so I just have, and this is not even, I don't think this is the pro version. Yeah, so, um, right, so in Canva, there is plenty of templates as well. So if that is what you want to go for, like if I just type in like timeline in here, right, there is a lot of presets and visuals that you can look to explore. Some of the times with these, you know, yeah. Some of these are a lot of the times you would need a pro version, but it's still good to, you know, you're still able to see that template, which is nice, right? Because you're still getting information on their visual design to begin with. And a lot of times you can recreate those from elements yourself as well. But what I wanted to showcase here really with Canva is that there is a lot more individual visual assets compared to Google Slides, right? So if you remember the comics that we um talked about earlier, let's say if I want to, right, like let's say I'm going to do trees for simplicity. Right, so just think about the ways that that I don't know exactly how that comic was created, but you could do, right, could just search up some of these, right? Like let's say I wanted to say at this time period, right, we have this kind of vegetation in the background. Get another tree. Um, right, you can search up all of these individual assets in a way. So then after, right, like at the end, you are kind of putting that graphic together. So that's what I was referring to like earlier. Like when you look at enough stuff that other people have done, and you're like, okay, well, I've never thought of communicating it this way. Maybe I try it out today. Once you start emulating those things, at the end, you can like maybe even create things right beyond just starting out with the template. You can actually work to use a lot of these. Just bringing assets together is a great place to start. Um, I just want an individual flower. But
In the meantime, we have a couple questions.
let's go for it.
The one is Canvas free and available for all?
Yeah, so Canva is a free to use platform. If you want like like these with these crown symbols on there, those are like if you want to go even more in depth into Canva, you could get like a premium pro subscription, but like for use, yes, it is free and available for all. So like the graphics that I'm putting on here, like I did not spend a single dime in order to make something like this. So any other questions? I know you said there might have been a couple.
Yeah, just one.
Oh, it's just that one. Okay. Right. So, okay, overly simplistic flower, but you get the idea, right? And then it's nice, right? Then again, because you can put, right, like whatever happened there, right? And then you can put like whatever year, major activity, right? You can label things, you can customize fonts, right? Um, you can do a lot of things with Canva because it's basically a blank canvas. You can also do the same thing, I would say, in Google Slides, but you have to just go find individual assets yourself online. Versus like Canva comes with a database, so that is um, really nice. But yeah, let me see. Yeah, and then similarly with the templates, I know just to go back to it very quickly. Um, Right, with the Canva templates, you can also customize. So, like, let's say if I only like one part of this, I can take it and then I can mix and match with something else. So, um, I would really encourage you to just, you know, just start interacting with, some of these templates and, maybe designs that other people have done. And because I think that that is really how you start to build visual literacy. It's really, looking at things, trying it out trying even more. Right. So that is my walkthrough part of things. Let's see. Any other questions about that? I just want to make sure before.
I think we're good so far.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Yeah, so I would say honestly that is most of the actual content itself. Next up, we're just gonna do something like as I said, right? Being able to look at something, try it out a little bit, and then see how it makes you feel, right? So next up, let me share my screen. Okay, here. All right, so I think for the next 10 to 15, let's do 10 minutes or so. Um, I would challenge you today to, whatever it is that you are trying to communicate, think of this as like a social media like you're prepping for some kind of social media content or it could also be a conference talk. Try to use either Canva or Google Slide to create a visual and then I will send a link in the chat. I think that will be helpful for people to navigate. To create just a very simple visual. It could be as simple as like what I just did with like the trees and the flowers and putting people on maps. And then give it like a one sentence caption, um, as if you would be posting it on social media. So let me send. This is a site to Canva. I think the desktop version should work fine for you. But if you would prefer Google Slides, like as I showed, like to just work on some of the timelines and presets, that is totally fine as well. Any questions about this? It can be on anything you would like to communicate. It does not have to be elaborate.
I think like for me, when I think about like trying to communicate my research in social media, sometimes I don't really know how to organize the data. I mean, how
Mm,
to visually do it because sometimes there's so much stuff that you want to say,
mm.
and it's like makes it too convoluted. So, do you have any tips about how to, at least design the basics, like an outline or something?
I would say, yeah, that's a really, great and certainly reasonable question. I would say a lot of times you're not trying to communicate like a lot of information at the same time. So if there are, right, like again, like at the beginning, outline what you want to communicate. And if you recognize that that is a lot, that is potentially a lot for someone who is a general audience member, making sure that you're breaking it down, right? Because you're not only posting once on social media, right? You can post multiple times. So break it down into smaller bits and pieces, right? Like maybe like a small graphic each time. And then you can, make connection between your posts at the like with Instagram specifically, I suppose, right? Like you could post individual graphics and then maybe at the end you can put it together into some sort of like reels or like, 30-second video, that sorts of things. So start off with like the simple visuals and like short captions and that sort of things. And then once you have enough of those, you can kind of build it together to something that is more like slightly longer with videos and things. That's what I would say.
Yeah, thank you.
Mhm. So as I said, my lab primarily does avian evolution and genomics. So one thing that I had worked on for one of my projects is looking at diet as a driver for bird speciation. So in terms of right? Like some kind of visual and storyline, starting out with, just the basics. There's a group of birds, right? They're in a forest, and thinking about that, like really getting the audience to think about the twist, the transition, right? What if they started liking different insects, right? And what if these insects are located on two separate sides of the forest? So then, um, right, like now parts of one of the group is spending time more and more with beetles, other parts of the group is spending more and more time with butterflies, right? And over time, and something I'm missing here, right, is the time I didn't necessarily include that here, but um the additional, I guess, tips that I would offer is also like even when you're describing some of these things, making sure that your language, right? Like when we talk about visual communication, it doesn't mean you have no text, but even when you're talking about text, think about it as like almost like you're building a picture book. So if I say like, right, like these groups of birds, they're kind of hanging out less and less, right? Eventually, all parts of the group is going to be um, well, not parts of the group. They're going to become separate groups over time, and that's how speciation could potentially occur in this situation. So really trying to use some of the, especially with non-scientific audience, I would say even like if you're at a conference, other people I think they tend to have a little bit more science background even, but like especially if you're talking to general audiences, making sure that you're using languages that aren't kind of more down to the basics is great places to be. So, all right, so we're at 9:57. If anybody else would like to share, we'd love to see yours. But I will also offer this time um, to just answer any questions. I'll put this on. Then if you could take a moment to fill out this feedback form, both um, for me to better understand how I can make these more intuitive and more smooth. So thank you so much all for being here today. And again, I will take any questions at this moment.
All right. I don't think we have questions, but thank you very much, Lisa. It was great. And this is actually a really good way to end this series of workshops sometimes that we have on data, data, I just forgot the word. But anyway, So, like what I just wanted to say is that this talk is also gonna be available online. I will send you a link
Mhm.
once we have uploaded. And this is also the last talk of our series, as just mentioned. So we're gonna have a new series next semester, probably starting next September. So just stay tuned. And also, if you're interested in helping us organize these workshops, we're always looking for people. So just reach out to me, and it will be great to talk to you. All right. Thank you, everyone. A
Thanks,
good rest of
everybody.
your day.